Using inflation to beat the $20 trillion national debt. The United States will soon be $20 trillion in debt. This crushing debt will never be repaid. Never, never, never. It will continue to grow until it eventually destroys our country. Unless we have a plan to beat the debt, it will destroy our nation. The United States spent $223 billion on interest on the debt last year. And this figure is rising faster than any other government expenditure. Interest on the debt over the next 10 years will total $5.8 trillion, according to the Congressional Budget Office. If the debt continues to rise at the current pace, the United States will enter a financial death spiral, just like Venezuela. Most of the federal budget will go to pay the interest and not much else. The angry voters will revolt. The politicians will borrow money to pay the interest. And eventually the nation will default like a banana republic. The currency will become worthless, and the people will struggle to feed themselves. Once the national debt grows beyond a certain percentage of gross domestic product, the nation enters into a financial death spiral. This is where we find ourselves headed, and this is how we can turn things around. If the United States is to become debt-free, then an economic plan is necessary. The future belongs to those who plan for it. A nation can use the following tools to deal with debt: cutting spending, raising taxes, and inflation. We will use all of them. First, the United States must stop spending more money than it takes in taxes. This means cuts to the two biggest government programs of all, defense and welfare. Cutting spending is painful. It is a painful and even suicidal practice for Congress, and one that they are loath to deal with. First and foremost, this means running the budget and the economy like a business to maximize income and to minimize expenditures. Our government is wasteful and inefficient. With a change in philosophy, we can save hundreds of billions of dollars every year and begin to use other strategies to add to national wealth. Sunset laws will end the government zombie programs that go on forever and ever without any reason whatsoever. Taking a maximum position on unnecessary spending means cutting costs where possible and reasonable, wherever possible. Let's take the penny as one small example. No one uses pennies. They cannot buy anything, but the copper lobby pays Congress to make 13 billion of them a year. If we did away with the penny, Lincoln would still have the $5 bill, and we would have an extra $132 million a year. Case 2. The government is warehousing 50,000 wild horses at a yearly price tag of $75 million. Either release them or sell them off for a profit. Both examples are not much money compared to the debt itself, but taken as a philosophy and repeated thousands of times, the effect is transformational. Political reform would have to take place first for this to occur. The 28th Amendment for publicly financing elections will break the special interest stranglehold that drives these zombie programs on forever and ever. Raising taxes is another tool. Raising taxes works best in good economic times, but is never popular even then. Even when cotton is high and the catfish are jumping, raising taxes is extremely unpopular. Raise taxes too high and it decreases the incentive to work. People become less productive or go on the dole, and collected tax revenues actually fall after a certain point of raising taxes too high. You collect fewer taxes. Now, the Paris Hilton tax is advisable because it is easier to tax the super rich who are now no longer living. All of their empires should be, their financial empires of the super rich should be absorbed into the federal treasury, and each of their dependents should receive no more than $10 million each. The Paris Hilton tax. The greatest empires in history fell. They fell when elites amassed political power, huge fortunes, and avoided paying taxes. The toiling masses economically collapsed under the burden, and the empires that had lasted 500 or 1,000 years were no more. America has lasted 240 years, give or take, but we are repeating the same history. Currently, we tax labor. But instead of taxing work, we should be taxing consumption. We will start slow and replace the payroll tax with a VAT tax, a tax on consumption, value-added tax, accepting food and medicine. A change in mindset will work wonders, and there is no substitute for a wise tax policy, but the real savings is a different monetary policy. The strategy of erasing the debt by raising inflation can cut our debt in half in 10 years. First, it will require priorities to be shifted away from spending on defense and the welfare state and towards domestic infrastructure projects, workforce education, and higher wages for our people. The middle class and the working class have had a terrible time for 30 years. We will craft a strategy to lower the national burden, the national debt, and to raise wages, while at the same time lowering the cost of home mortgages. If wages increase through laws, and at the same time inflation is going up, then people who work for a living can pay off their existing 30-year mortgages with cheaper dollars. In effect, you are cutting your mortgage cost, the cost of your house that you pay in real terms, in half. With an inflation rate of 6% held steady for 10 years, the current $20 trillion debt is reduced by half in real terms. By increasing wages for workers and spending money on public works and infrastructure, the nation can maintain a steady state inflation rate, which is not excessive, and makes our goods cheaper overseas, more competitive. The Federal Reserve sets interest rates, and after gains in real wages, increased domestic spending on infrastructure, and modest adjustments to M1, the money supply, then the Fed can step in and make finer adjustments to maintain an inflation rate that does not fluctuate, but stays at 6%. An inflation rate that is planned and managed to be 6% a year for 10 years allows people and businesses to make long-term plans and to adjust their spending habits, to adjust their plans, and to make adjustments for a known future. People on fixed incomes are penalized, but they are hurt less compared to how much the younger workers are helped. Workers whose taxes pay to support the retirees. Inflation helps debtors. people who owe money, and inflation punishes note holders, the institutions that hold the debt, our debt. The American taxpayer is the debtor who owes. So who are the note holders? Who holds our debt? Nearly 50% of the American debt is held by foreign governments and foreign institutions. Now, the banks and the super rich do not want inflation of any kind because they benefit from this zero interest environment. However, this is a dangerous strategy. We may actually stumble or backslide into an era of deflation or stagnation where the real value of the debt expands on its own. This adds to the woes of the nation and to the man and woman on the street. There are tools to control inflation, but there are no tools to control deflation. And as such, deflation and stagflation should be avoided at all costs. Inflation, moderate inflation, makes people make more beneficial decisions, monetary decisions, which in the end will help the banks and the super rich because of the concept of trickle up. Mitt Romney, to take an example, has $300 million, give or take, theoretically, but he can only buy 10 Cadillac cars at a time. But if his gross wealth of $300 million is spread out among 3,000 people who now all each have $100,000 each in their hand, they will be able to buy 3,000 Cadillacs. General Motors benefits, they hire more people, the economy expands, even Mitt Romney's General Motors stock goes up in value. Trickle up economics. It works. Inflation makes people put their money to work. Inflation, moderate inflation, drives people to invest in businesses and to spend and put their money to wise use, while zero inflation does not penalize money that is stagnant and non-productive. Moderate inflation is a push to get going to invest in buildings, plants, and equipment. Inflation historically has gotten a bad reputation because countries that just print money destroy their currencies with runaway inflation, such as Venezuela. An economic plan that factors in a steady state inflation at 6% for the long term, 10 years, can help small businesses, can help workers, can help the middle class, and they are the ones who drive our economy, not the banks, not the big banks, not the Fortune 500 giants. Small businesses and workers in the middle class drive our economy. 30 years of favoritism for those who control large amounts of capital has destroyed the working class, devastated the middle class, and is leading to economic and social collapse. Some segments of society will not do as well as others in the beginning of this plan of moderate inflation. However, once the plan has been in place, it will begin to work for all citizens as our collective debt is managed, erased, cut in half, and further eliminated over time. Managed inflation is a key component to regaining economic equilibrium and making the economy hum like a well-tuned engine of productivity for everyone.